Like the title of the video says, we're going to be talking about Nezha and his third ability, Warding Halo. So, Warding Halo, what is it, what isn't it, etc., etc. Let's go ahead and start talking. So, basically, Warding Halo is made up of two components. One, very unimportant, and then the other is basically the entire reason to use the skill. So what we're going to do first is we're going to cover the non-important version of the skill, or I guess aspect of the skill, and that is its damage and its stunning component. So basically, in a 2-meter radius around you, when you have this up, you will stun enemies and they will take a small amount of damage per second. The radius of this effect is extremely small at 2 meters. The damage over time is also very, very low. You usually won't notice it at higher levels at all. So basically, this aspect of the skill is more for flavor as opposed to power or really design. It doesn't really do anything for a build. So, moving on to the defensive aspect of Warding Halo, this is where this skill actually shines. It's what it's meant for. So, looking over the card, let's go ahead and read it. We're going to read through the stats, and then we're going to talk about a few things. So, Warding Halo creates a protective ring of fire that stuns and damages enemies who get too close. Now, the stuns and damages enemies, we talked about that already, but the protective ring of fire is a bit complicated, so let's talk about that. Whenever you cast this skill, it is a 75 cost skill. This is very typical for a third ability. It is a defensive ability that lasts for a decent amount of time, pretty much in any type of content, but it is somewhat expensive, and Nezha is not a caster frame, so you generally don't build a whole lot of efficiency on him. The damage absorption shows as 1475. We're going to have to talk about that in a bit. We're going to talk about some other things first. We've already talked about the radius and the damage per second. Those are both for the stun and damaging components. We have a time invulnerable here of 3 seconds. Now, similar to all the other abilities in the game that make you invulnerable, this cannot be scaled with ability duration. This is both good and bad. It's bad because invulnerability, having it up longer, is better, especially for this skill. But it also means that if you take negative duration, it's not actually going to be hurting that invulnerability timing. You're still going to have it for 3 seconds. And then finally, we have an absorption multiplier here of 2.5. Now, looking through all of these things, we're basically going to try to figure out exactly what Warding Halo's protective ring of fire does. So let's go ahead and cast the ability, and we're going to look and see what happens. So whenever I cast this ability, you're going to see I basically get invulnerable, look in the top right, for about 3 seconds. Let's go ahead and do that one more time. So we cast it, and then for about 3 seconds. You also notice that immediately upon casting this ability, you become invulnerable. It does not wait for the ability to finish casting. It is immediate. Now, during that invulnerability window, you will absorb damage, and that's where our 2.5 times multiplier comes into play. So looking at the skill, you see we have an absorption multiplier of 2.5 times. Effectively, if an enemy hits you for 100, you're going to absorb 250 HP. Now, this Warding Halo HP, you're going to see it in the bottom right corner of your screen, that 1475. Consider this temporary HP. Now, temporary HP behaves in a number of ways that are kind of weird and different. For one thing, it doesn't go into your normal maximum HP. This means that you can't regenerate it with various effects, Warframe abilities, arcanes, etc. It is just a flat amount of health that gets added to your character. Now, let's talk a bit more about what affects this thing. So, effectively, the number itself is created via 3 components. So if we come in here and we look, we're actually going to see that the skill says 1475 damage absorption. Now, that is actually the minimum amount that you can currently get with the skill. This is actually already made up of 2 components. It has a base health amount of 1000. So that base amount of health of 1000 is just always true on the skill, no matter what else you kind of put on it, unless you have negative strength or something. Keep in mind this damage absorption number does scale with ability strength. Now, that 1000 is your base amount, but it says 1475 is our base amount here. Well, that's because of the second component. It also scales off of your armor. So it scales at a 250%, very similar to our absorption multiplier ratio, 250% of our armor. So if you look down here, our armor is 190. If you multiply that by 2.5, you're going to get 475. So that's where we get our 1475 number. Now, immediately you're going to think the way you scale this skill is with armor, and that's not a terrible way to scale the skill at low levels. So the third aspect of Warding Halo's health number component, how much temp HP you get, is that absorption multiplier. So whenever you get hit and you take in damage, it's actually going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. That gives us scaling to any level of combat. Now that absorption multiplier, that 2.5, also scales with ability strength, so we can get that up to 5 times the damage coming in and things like that. So it's going to be very, very effective for us to get big amounts of burst damage come in during our invulnerability window to give us absolutely massive amounts of Warding Halo. Now at low levels, you're not going to be able to get those massive amounts. Enemies are going to be hitting you for 50, 100, stuff like that, really, kind of low, and they might be hitting you slowly. Some of the smaller guys might be hitting you for like 10 and 15 and stuff like that. So the way I kind of use it as a rule of thumb is if you're probably below level 40, armor is probably going to be a better scaling component for you, for this skill in particular. If you're above level 40, especially once you hit like level 60 and above, especially once you start getting into like Steel Path and stuff like that, the flat amount that you get, the base amount that you get from armor, is no longer going to be that effective. Adding in 250% of, even like 600 is only going to be like 1,000, 2,000 temporary HP. If you absorb all this damage coming in at level 100, you can very easily and very respectably end up with 30,000, 40,000 Warding Halos reliably, and you can spike it up even beyond that sometimes. So just keep in mind that at low levels, because enemy damage coming in isn't going to be that big, you're going to want more armor to scale this, and you're going to feel very invincible. At higher levels, you're actually going to get way more out of your damage absorption portion. Now we kind of have an idea of how the number is calculated. Let's talk about the halo itself. So the halo itself is very weird. So what we're going to do is I'm going to spawn an enemy, and this guy's lower level, so we see he's level 30. It's a Bombard. The reason I chose a Bombard for this test was because he hits very slowly. So he's going to shoot me, and you're going to see that I take damage to my Warding Halo at the bottom right, but I've also taken damage to my health pool at the top right. So I'm taking damage to my shield as he's hitting me. Now, the reason this is because the Warding Halo doesn't actually mitigate all damage that is incoming. It mitigates 90% of the damage incoming. That means that you can actually die while you have a 50 or 60,000 Warding Halo up. It doesn't matter. You will always take damage to your true health bar when you have this skill. Does that mean it's bad? No, not at all. In fact, what it means is healing effects are extremely easy to come by. You don't need something to heal you for your full HP all the time. In fact, the healing that you need when you have a Warding Halo up is literally 10 times less. Now that we kind of see how that 90% portion works, let's talk about the Halo itself and what affects it. So there's some really interesting stuff about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Bombard, and I'm going to simulate him in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come over here, and I'm going to come right here to this, and I have Null Star as a helmet ability on my first configuration, and we're going to see what that does. So Null Star should be giving me a very hefty damage reduction. I don't know, I think it's 40% or something, 30% at this level. Yeah, I think it's about 30%, six particles. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to come in here, and we're going to pop it, and then we're going to use our Warding Halo. And you're going to see he's hitting us. Now, you're going to see that we're taking damage at a completely normal rate. Now, if you were to compare this to not having Null Star up at all, which I believe I've gotten rid of all of it, you're going to see, if you go back through the footage and look, our warding halo isn't getting affected by this. And the only way I can kind of, I guess, come to a conclusion on why this is, it's that warding halo itself is a different entity. It is temporary HP as an entity that is getting hit that is not you. So if you ever cast a self buff, that will not affect it. This also includes the mod Adaptation. If you have Adaptation, that gives you a damage resistance buff of up to 90%. Your warding halo is not you, therefore it does not ever actually get this mod, and it also does not have the capability of taking the stat from you of that 90% damage resistance. Now, we'll go ahead and throw the enemy back over here so we can actually see it in action. So things like Null Star, things like Adaptation are not going to be really great for warding halo in terms of the actual halo and its effective HP. They do still affect you. So as you take 10% of the incoming damage, you will further mitigate that if you have Adaptation by about 50 to 60%, depending on the enemy's damage composition. If you guys don't know how Adaptation works, or how enemy damage works, I would highly recommend you look into it. Adaptation is a really great mod, but at face value, it may not be as good as you think it is. In addition, things like Null Star, which would normally be an outright, if you max it out, 90% damage reduction, it isn't going to be able to do that for you. Now, does that mean it's all necessarily doom and gloom? Well, no, not technically. So a very interesting thing that we can do is, we know that the warding halo doesn't actually take stats from ourself. However, it is an entity that exists in the world. So this is where we enter Elemental Ward. So Elemental Ward actually produces an aura. Now, even if you nerf this thing's range into the ground of like 3 meters or something, you're still going to have enough range to hit warding halo because it's right next to you. Now, obviously with Elemental Ward, we would not want to go with the health buff, as it actually doesn't end up affecting our warding halo at all. However, the armor portion does. Now, what you might be thinking is, hey, yeah, we'll get a little bit of armor buff from this, which means our base will actually increase. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So if I cast this, you're going to see we end up with, I think, 3156. I think this is actually a fully modded setup. Yeah, let's pull all this stuff off. Sorry about that. So it should be that 1475, I think, that we were looking at. Alright, so we get that 1475. Now if I come back in here, and then I cast our Elemental Ward first, we should see our white armor. And you should see the 1475 go up. Now why is that? Well, our armor is higher. But here's the kicker. In addition to that, it actually grants armor in an AoE, right? We're actually producing an aura that is armor. And I don't want to get too much into chroma because this isn't a chroma video, but effectively this makes Elemental Ward incredible when you're talking about warding halo, because it actually has the ability to give warding halo armor. So let's take a look and see what that means. So what I'm going to do here first is let's reset my thing, and we're going to cast our armor first, and then we're going to cast our halo, and then we're going to go and get hit by him. And you're going to notice that this guy is going to do way less damage, to the tune of, I think, 2.5 times less damage to our warding halo than he was before. This is huge. This effectively multiplies your warding halo's HP by a huge number. And there isn't a whole lot of things in the game that can even multiply it at all, because normally all the buffs in the game are only for you. This means that warding halo scales extremely well with anything that is aura based, or anything where the warding halo can sit in an area of effect and become affected by it. You know, that kind of thing. So just keep in mind, warding halo is actually really great synergy with Elemental Ward. Now, jumping back out of the synergy real quick, out of the helmet synergy, because I don't want to focus too much on that kind of stuff. I'm more about telling you guys what the skills are and how they function so you guys can make the best decisions for yourselves. Let me kill this guy because he's starting to annoy me. Sorry about that. So coming back over here, looking at the skill, Warding Halo, we basically covered how the HP is made up, the damage and stunning component of it, how much it costs, all that kind of stuff, and most of this stuff scales exactly like you'd think. Efficiency definitely affects your drain, ability strength definitely affects your absorption multiplier, and your damage, your flat damage absorption amount. The range affects your radius, ability strength affects your damage per second, and time invulnerability, like all the other skills that create invulnerabilities, is not affected. So effectively with this skill, you generally just want a lot of strength. It has nothing to do, the most important thing about this has nothing to do with time or range. You don't really care about time or range for this skill, so just stack as much strength as you can to make this thing go crazy, both with its flat amount, its base health, and its damage absorption multiplier. So ability strength is the way to go on the skill. Now that being said, there is an augment for the skill that we're going to talk about next. So let me go ahead and pull the augment, and that is going to be Safeguard. So Safeguard, Warding Halo augment can now be cast on allies with 50% effectiveness. So this actually does also make them invulnerable. So what we're going to do, just as an easy little test here, because I don't have friends to help me do this kind of thing, the only real interesting thing about this is that whenever you point at an ally, you won't necessarily cast it on them. So you see I'm perfectly pointing at him. You will always cast it on yourself if you do not have the buff, even if you're pointing at an ally. Now that being said, it is also very easy to point it at Kubros and things like that. You'll see the little buff there. You also saw that he became invulnerable for a short time. This is a really great skill because it allows people to be invulnerable, and it allows you to spread that invulnerability around. Now the only bad thing about it is the fact that this is an expensive skill, so just spamming invulnerabilities around is not super viable. In addition to that, they do get a bit of Warding Halo temporary HP. This is obviously, like the skill says, subtracted out by 50% of the total value, so you basically cut the entire Warding Halo that you would get in half. So it's a little bit harder to utilize for other people, whereas you can kind of run into the middle of people. You're expecting it because you know when you're going to hit the button, you're expecting that damage incoming, and you've set it up almost. For other people, it's going to be a nice invulnerability buff, but other than that, it's not going to grant them a massive amount of temporary HP like it will you, because you're not going to be able to game that damage absorption amount. Now that being said, this thing does have basically an infinite cast range, so I can cast it in like Plains of Eidolon and things like that. Another noteworthy thing about this augment is that it is obnoxious to get on anything that is flying. It is not super forgiving. So as you can see here, I can't hit him. The only way I've really been able to figure out how to do this is to make them attack something, and it makes it a little bit easier because they kind of focus in on an enemy. Now that being said, I think I have my attack precept off because I'm not prepared as usual, so let me maybe switch this guy out for something that does. I think, no, he doesn't even, like this, yeah, great, so professional. But anyway, let's go ahead and see if we can't get it. There we go. And nope, still, there we go, got it. So there's a little bit of like movement lag when they're attacking, as you saw there, and it can let you hit them, but it is just so obnoxious. I would never recommend it, to be honest with you. They just stick too close to like behind and above you to this, for this to ever be really valuable as a sentinel buff. Now for a Kubro, it's actually really, really great for things that like Havats and stuff that can die, and they usually do because they're melee range and they're in people's face and stuff. This is a really great skill to like give them a few seconds if you see their health go down. So we've covered the augment as well. We've covered some interesting synergies. I think that's honestly going to cover it for the skill. So, like always, guys, if I have missed anything or misrepresented anything on this skill or about Nezha or really whatever else you can think of, let me know in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.